All right, sorry to interrupt, and good evening. My name is Adam Davis. I'm with Oregon Humanities, and on behalf of Oregon Humanities, I want to welcome everybody to the anchor leg of the 2016-2017 Portland Think and Drink series. So thank you very much for being here. We've been talking all series long about land and belonging and race and in a way about justice. And we're very excited to continue that conversation tonight and to think about poverty and to think about creative solutions to inequality and poverty and to talk with three people who are doing a lot of work in that area. One of whom is walking back down the aisle now. Alan Hipólito from Verde and Living Cully. John Haines from Mercy Corps Northwest. And Mary Lee from Multnomah Idea Lab. And we will learn, thank you. We're going to hear about the projects they're working on, and I think also about the way they think about these questions. The format of the evening is, first we're going to watch a short film by Donovan Smith and Sika Stanton, who I hope are here. Maybe that's Sika smiling and waving, so great. Thank you for being here. It's a short film called The Numbers, and we'll start it in just a couple minutes. It, too, is part of a bigger project called This Land, which is a series of short films and sound pieces and prose and photography pieces about how land policy has affected communities of color in Oregon, working with artists of color to tell those stories. And the stories are continuing to show up on one website, and we are really excited that Sika and Donovan worked on this film and that some of the people that you talked to are here in the audience tonight. So I just want to say a big welcome and thank you to everybody involved with The Numbers, which we're going to look at and use as our starting point in just a minute. After we watch that short film, four of us will talk for a bit, and then we'll open up questions somewhere over in this region. And then, when we're formally done with that, we're going to encourage you to stay and keep talking, and maybe talk especially to people you don't know, and we might even give you a question to talk about if you'd like, and there will be food and, of course, stuff to drink in the back. So that's the layout for the evening. Before we get to the film, I want to thank just a couple organizations for making this and other programs like it possible. So the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Oregon Cultural Trust, first and foremost, making a lot of this kind of activity possible. Willamette Week helped get the word out about this. Stoll Reeves and Tonkin Torp, corporate sponsors for the Think and Drink series all year. And then four community partners that have really been great partners in thinking about and getting the word out about this stuff. And so the Portland Housing Center, the City Club of Portland, the North Star Civic Foundation, and University of Oregon's Agora School of Journalism. So maybe you could just say a big thanks, and you could help me in thanking all of those folks. One last thanks before we show the film, and this is the architect of this whole series, and for a lot, and also all the This Land work, and a person who's just done a great deal of work to make so many of these programs and publications and films happen. Many of you know her, some of you don't, but Kathleen Holt, just please. And we can thank her again later. Enough for me. We're going to jump into talking in a minute, but for now, I hope you'll both enjoy and be provoked and challenged by The Numbers. So let's watch that. So first, I just want to say a big thanks again to Sika and Donovan and the folks that spoke to Sika and Donovan. And then I wonder if we could start talking by thinking about the first words that we hear in the film, that the numbers, that there's a neighborhood that's essentially the numbers in every city. I think those are the first spoken words in there, and I wanted to, Mary, maybe we could start with you and just ask sort of, How does that set with you? What does that make you think when you hear that comment?
Well, I want to say I had the opportunity to see the film before tonight, and it's super difficult from my perspective for the three of us to be up here following that film. Like, frankly, the young people represented in that film need to be up here having that conversation with us, so I want to acknowledge that. You know, and I think it goes to questions of who gets asked to be and speak and represent, and we certainly, the three of us, represent a perspective, but, you know, that's lived experience there. And the second thing that I would say about it is, for me, and I hope for all of you, that we heard the call to action, that statement, that those statements were to do better, be better, work harder to respond to that. And I sort of come away with a question of, you know, from a design perspective, how might we get the resources or the control of the resources into the hands of the community, folks like we heard from just now, because they know what they want, they know what they need, and in many ways it should be the job of government and other service systems to figure out how to get those resources into the hands of the people.
Okay, thank you. John, what hits you when you hear the numbers are in every city?
Well, for one, I love the numbers, actually. I think there's great assets out there. There's great neighborhoods. They could use some more parks, some other things, but you know, the numbers, well, it wasn't referred to that, but East Portland was 82nd. You know, and there's another 80 blocks to go to the city's edge on Stark, and then it goes out another, I think, 174th. So the numbers really are transboundary. They go into Gresham, Rockwood, and it is a long area. I see a lot of opportunity there, that there are a lot of renters, means that there needs to be some different kind of asset building strategies, different kind of amenities and things that homeowners may otherwise get. But I'm not feel as distanced from the numbers as see it as a place of a lot of potential growth for good things.
Mm-hmm. Alan, I don't know how it sits with you.
I guess when I hear that, and I think about this this place, and I think about it in other cities, right? Because eventually you run out of places to go. And that's what I think about, right? There's limits to how big our city is. It's very hard to afford to live in this city increasingly anywhere, unless you make a certain amount of money. And it's the same in lots of other cities around the country. So I start to kind of, where my mind goes is, if we don't make a stand, a real stand that involves using the power, like the one person said in the video, using our resources differently, where do these communities go when there's nowhere left to be in the city?
And in a way, a couple things. I mean, it's interesting thinking, John, you said you love the numbers, and in a way, I think everybody that spoke in the film also has a love for the neighborhood, but also they talked before that about the perceptions of the place. Sketchy was a word that came up twice, and so, and then and I'm thinking now of pushing a little bit towards your work and where you're trying to, your organizations are intervening, and what it is. So in a way, what I want to ask is, I think this is related, Alan, to your comment about where to go. How do you know where your work ought to be taking place? What are the markers out there in the world that say, this is where in Portland we ought to be working?
I'll jump in. One reason why we chose to do a project specifically around 122nd was because 3/4 of the neighborhood were renters that weren't building assets by the default mechanism of paying down a mortgage. There's strong churches, a lot of diverse churches. There's great schools. David Douglas, Park Rose, Reynolds, Centennial. Stronger school districts than I think we've seen in PPS, unfortunately, till last night, thankfully, with the bond measure passing. And there's a lot of diversity. I think they're more fascinating neighborhoods in a lot of respects than other places. I think both the need and the opportunity and then the character of community groups that are strong out there is what induced our energy to be there.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like you're doing really very neighborhood-based work, so why Why Cully?
Well, I don't know that we picked it for a certain reason, because we were already there, right? The organizations we were working for were already there. But I can tell you why some of our partners decided to join us, and it was some of the same reasons that John said. They saw a network of organizations trying to do something different. They saw a neighborhood with a lot of poverty, a lot of people of color, and no surprise, therefore, not a lot of parks, not a lot of habitat, not a lot of environmental goods, and that we were trying to find a way to address all those things at the same time. And they also saw a real risk of displacement in the neighborhood, that we had a lot of renters. We're kind of the next wave as things move from the center to the east. And I think they felt that this was where they wanted to invest their resources to try to do something a little different, and again, try to make a stand.
So you said both do something a little different and try to make a stand, and I'm wondering, because Mary, you're in a, I guess, would you call it a department? Because it's called a lab, so.
Yeah.
But in a way that
Do you
gets.
get like lab coats and
Right,
everything?
exactly.
Like,
We do have a lab coat in our office.
And you get to put the either literal or metaphorical lab coat on and decide, here, we're going to try this, we're going to test this. How do you decide where you're going to test, what you're going to...
Yeah. Well, let me start by just saying where I'm coming from and my perspective on this. So I work for local county government. I am a government employee and I am a bureaucrat. I feel like I'm coming clean now, right? But let me say three things about where I'm coming from around that, because it completely drives my perspective and how I show up in the workplace. First of all, I'm a proud bureaucrat, and I think those two words probably don't get put together. I want to tell you that I come by that term honestly. My father would tell me on many occasions that the Chinese people invented bureaucracy 2,000 years ago, and I should be proud to be a bureaucrat. Okay. When I would come home and say, Dad, this is killing me. Be proud to be a bureaucrat. So I come from that perspective. I believe in government, and I've spent much of my career working in government because I think it has to be held accountable. The second place that I am coming from is that government policies, practices, and investments caused, if not wholly, then majorly, the inequity that we have in our society right now, both in terms of wealth and in almost every dimension of our lives. If government acts, we're able to create what we now live under. There must be a way for government acts to end or ameliorate the inequities that we see in wealth and income and housing and in every other dimension of our lives, right? Now, maybe some will say, and maybe I'll get Alan to say this, is that, I don't know if people saw this cartoon about the octopus sushi chef who's doing sushi as an octopus, and it says he's working for change from the inside, right? So maybe I'm the octopus sushi chef, but I do believe that we have to be inside and working on this. And then finally, I feel like it is incumbent upon all of us to reframe the narrative of who is living in poverty and why they are living in poverty. And I think that speaks to, the film that we just saw of people know what they believe in their own experiences about living in the numbers, and it is nothing like what we hear told about who lives there and why they live there. And I think it's desperately important for us all to reframe who's in poverty, why they are in poverty, because that then will help us reframe what are the answers, what are the potential solutions, and what are the potential actions and policies that we either have to take if we're working within government, or we have to call upon government to take as citizens in the community.
Right, because if you characterize it a certain way, right, if you characterize the problem a certain way, and in the past and still sometimes today, if you characterize it as blight, which has certain statutory definitions, right? If you talk about, if you put forth a narrative that that's a bad place and we need to change it, right? Then you can justify all kinds of extractive actions, including extractive actions that forced people to move out there in the first place from where they were before. So if you characterize it as a bad thing that you need outside forces to come in and fix, then you're going to get a certain response. If you characterize it as a group of people, a community with ideas about how they want to see their neighborhood in the future, and you orient your work towards supporting them in their vision and overcoming the barriers that prevent that vision from coming to reality, you're going to have a different response.
Right on, that's right.
So it seems like already stepping towards answering your kind of challenge, which is to tell a different story about poverty, is what I heard you say. And I guess I would just want to ask right now, what is the story that you think is the accurate story?
You mean with respect to poverty?
With respect to poverty, yeah.
The accurate story.
Well, I'm just picking up, I think, Mary, you said, I think, we should reframe the narrative around poverty and tell a different story about it. And so I think I just want to ask us to take a couple minutes and do that now. What are we not talking about that we should be talking about? How do we understand the existence of poverty? And who is living in it and why? I'm just putting the question in front of us.
All right, I'll put forth this. I just thankfully got a book that was just...
Notes.
Yeah, you can use them too.
Good.
I live by these things. So I got this book, thankfully, before this, when you told us what you wanted to talk about. So I have like 3 toggle points from mortgage interest deduction to universal basic income, to this book that was just published. And I got it from a colleague, and I'll be quick.
Okay.
I promise.
You're good.
It's called Financial Diaries. It was just published by Princeton Oxford Press. You're probably not going to find this at Powell's. But it was funded by Ford, Citibank, and under guidance for 7 years from the Center for Financial Service Innovation, which deals a lot with financial products for everybody, but substantially what isn't being delivered to low-income communities. And what they did is they traced not income and wealth, but cash flow for 7 years with 235 families. And the central thesis that they found, they picked up on a study, get this, from 1960 at University of Michigan. This is the panel study of income dynamics. And University of Michigan had carried forth this continuity of studying families, their children, and a life cycle arc of whether they bought homes or not, just where intergenerational poverty resided and was stuck. And among those things they discovered really was just that increasingly families are turbulent, volatile, and their financial circumstances are uncertain, even at different income levels, which doesn't necessarily address poverty, but it addresses sort of a prevailing sense that people are unstable at various income levels, and particularly at lower income levels. So Pew Trust, sorry for the data here, Alan, but...
I like data.
All right. So Pew Trust surveyed
need a site.
7,000 people, and 92% said they prefer stability over financial mobility today.
Stability over mobility.
Yeah. It's
So,
the uncertainty and volatility that is driving people into more, trouble, I guess, really.
yeah. Is volatility a part of how you would, either Alan or Mary, understand poverty, the story behind poverty, or what's core to that basic narrative?
I have no poverty scholarship to cite of my own or others, but the one thing that I believe is that poverty is an ecosystem, just like any other ecosystem, right? And some ecosystems are virtuous, and they create positive things, and then when the number of things around a person go wrong, then it's very, very difficult to climb out because everything bumps into each other. The car bill, the power bill, the rent, getting to work, the school clothes, maybe having to move. And so it's about interrupting a process. It's not, well, if I fix this one thing, if I could only get low-income assistance for the power bill, then everything would be fine. Or if only we had a better transit system, then everything would be fine. It's all of those things working together in concert that make it very difficult for no matter how hard a person works, no matter what kind of initiative they take, for them to break out. So we had, really briefly, when we first started our organization and we were just doing landscaping work, we had an individual who worked with us, largely, didn't speak a lot of English, largely spoke Spanish, and had gotten a DWI, right? And so he was like, but I want to drive for work. And there's a program, right? You can apply to drive for work. And so we helped him fill out the form. We communicated with the judge's office about, hey, we have this person, they work for us. We want to get them a permit to be able to drive while they're at work so they can keep their job. And they're like, okay. And it took us like 6-8 weeks of working that system, like visiting the judge's office, getting them to send the notice down to the state so that we could get that temporary thing. They sent the wrong notice down, right? Instead of him being convicted for DWI, which you could get a work license for, they sent the wrong crime down there, and so he was ineligible. And at the end of that, it's just like a tiny glimpse of, here we are, like bureaucratically aware, able to navigate a system, and it took us 6 to 8 weeks to get this person the ability to drive for work. That person trying to navigate that system by themselves with limited English, you know what that person's going to do? They're going to say, forget it, and they're going to drive anyway. And then sooner or later, they're going to get caught. And then they're going to go further down because they were driving without a license. And if they can't extricate themselves from this level, then the next level is even harder.
My hesitation in answering the question is really, I don't think it's for me to describe that. I think, again, if we were centering the lived experience of people who are living in poverty, actually listened to them and then believed them when they told us what it was they needed, wanted, their dreams, that's how we would describe what is the true accurate picture of poverty. I think the other thing that has to be said is we cannot have this conversation without talking about race and structural racism, because these things are inextricably linked, and not having that conversation is doing a disservice to the reality of us all, actually. But Alan, I think your example that you just gave really illustrates that, right? All of those processes are put into place because we can't trust people living on a low income to make good decisions, and we have to prevent fraud, and we have to have things, so if our vision of who's in poverty is someone who is inept, incompetent, incapable, and looking for ways to cheat, and all of those things, you put systems, because we're the government, we put systems in place that require people to have to go through those hoops. And any of us would make similar decisions and take similar actions faced in that situation. And I think if we think otherwise, we're fooling ourselves. Our incomes protect us if we are not currently living on a low income, protect us from having to bear the brunt of what people who are not are living with every day.
So maybe we could in a way with, again, that example of what sounds like so many ways that your life might be affected by a set of conditions that will make it difficult to say, get out of a ticket and get back to work, and all the implications it has for the rest of your life. How then to start building an organization or building collaborations or building a community investment trust? I guess I want to ask you to each talk about a specific mode of trying to disrupt what sounds like a system that's very hard to piece apart. Where then to create the wedge and start building it out? And again, with reference to a specific project your organization's working on would be great.
All right. I'll take the bait. Thank you. So we felt like the best thing to do was to talk with the people that we already work with out in Lents and out in East Portland. And I was lucky to get a number of really good student teams that had people, students that spoke multiple languages. So we approached essentially a human-centered design, although we didn't know it was called that at the time, where we went out and surveyed people in affordable housing, Rose CDC in particular, Lentz International Farmers Market. And we asked people, what's missing in your neighborhood? What do you want in the neighborhood? Do you save? Do you invest? Why not? Would you? And we zeroed in from that people wanted to invest. They had very little money to invest. They were missing a number of things in the neighborhood that just weren't there, from pizza to a bike shop to a bank to, among other things. So we went and decided, well, let's build something. So we zeroed in on a community investment trust, which is basically a private real estate investment trust, which was created in 1960 to aggregate ownership in real estate. It's a tax designation. And we basically turned its original intent on its head and drove the price point down to $10 to $100 a month so that people could afford it and anybody could be involved. And then found a property, improved it, bought it out of foreclosure. And we've got a sheet. I printed off about 100 of these. Sven, my colleague in the back, and I printed these off if you want to look at some of the facts. Essentially what it is a way to create financial inclusion and address asset poverty and give people a road to self-inclusion, self-determination, unsubsidized. So it's just a completely market-driven mechanism that didn't require any government intervention, any support. We did get some foundation money to help us rationalize doing it, to pay part of our salaries, et cetera. Right, Sven? And to pay for translation into 6 languages. I'll leave it at that. But it's a 29,000-foot building on 122nd and roughly Market. It's 27 tenants, nonprofit, for-profit. It's nearly 100% leased. It makes money now. So it's an investment where people can say, that's something I own. I'm a part of that building, even at $10 a month.
And that came from, that started with the question asked in several languages, what's missing?
Yeah, what's missing and what are you motivated to be part of that you're not part of? And it's a neighborhood where people are renters. So initially, we called it renter equity. And then we changed the name to Community Investment Trust to differentiate it from private REITs. But the vestiges of the instincts of this actually came from 1986 at Christmas. Can I tell a quick story?
Yeah.
All right. I worked for a big bank, and I was sent around town as a management trainee. And I worked out on 122nd in Canby, and out on Martin Luther King at First Interstate Bank. It's not Wells Fargo. Anyway, I was filling in for a guy that was playing Santa Claus at a branch at 26th and East Burnside. And now that's an apartment building. So I'm filling in for this guy playing Santa Claus and going around to branches, and I was told, here's the files from A, and here's Z, and here's a checklist, and you get to go from A to Z and make sure all the files are put together and signed. So I was bored to death. And, but doing this, and I looked up, and I saw somebody grab a bag and stuff it down the front of his pants and run out of the branch. And at that time, Oregon had the highest bank branch robbery rate in the country, which is another story, but, and there's a reason for that, and it doesn't exist now. But at that time, I was bored, and I did what you're not supposed to do, but I chased this bank robber down. And 26th and East Burnside and 28th didn't have the restaurants it has now. It was a little bit more like 160 seconds, and where Burnside, where the light rail is, which isn't always safe. So I chased this guy down, not trying to be a hero, but he ran into a plasma center, which is now a brew pub on Ankeny. And they caught this poor guy, and he was the same age I was, and I sort of felt bad that, gosh, but he did rob the bank. And so I was walking around that neighborhood, and I thought, wow, this is great. These are some really cool old houses. And I bought one. It was a 1911 duplex that the sign had fallen over, and it was for sale for $69,000. I gave him an offer of $60,000, and I got it, and I sold this house 5 years ago for $490,000, right? What did I do? I just bought a house in a neighborhood. I'd put a lot of sweat equity into it, but the difference between me and my friends that were down the street that I haven't seen since I left town for a number of years, came back, was I bought something in the neighborhood. I had an asset, it increased, and the renters are probably in the numbers now. So it made me, my instinct was, if you own something, you engage in the neighborhood differently, and you get the default mechanism of paying down a mortgage and paying down debt. So just a fact on that nationally, the average homeowner has $197,000 in net worth, and the average renter has just over $5,000.
Thank you. Yeah, Alan, I guess I want to ask again with a specific project that Verde or Living Cully is working on, and the question of how to know that that's the right place to start or to keep working within a large system that makes life difficult.
I'd be interested in kind of the racial breakdown of the wealth in home ownership.
That's right.
But, well, I think for us, we really came from this place of, like a lot of folks, recognizing that we had this really powerful sustainability movement in our region, and it was, creating jobs and institutions and businesses and reputations that were being exported to other cities. People were coming here to learn about stuff that we do. And even though it has a foundational commitment to equity, it really wasn't serving, and still to a large degree isn't serving low-income people and people of color. And at the same time, for many reasons, our communities haven't been able to access those resources and think about how to use them to address what's important to us. And so we just, and with a good number of an ever-growing list of partners, just kind of thought to ourselves, well, of the different things we do to protect the environment, which ones are most adaptable to meeting the kinds of needs and aspirations that folks in this film and folks up here are talking about? If they're not adaptable to that, then why do them in the first place, right? If you have a list of environmental initiatives or technologies or resources or programs, and half of them can make a meaningful difference in the disparities in our society and the other half can't, we just don't understand why you would do this half at all. It doesn't make sense as an institution, as a government, as a nonprofit. It doesn't make any sense at all. In terms of a project, one of the things that we like to share with folks is a program we've had for a little while called Verdes. And that actually grew out of the community telling us exactly what they wanted. We had been doing a lot of work with community members, with other nonprofits to try to access and change how this one street was going to be built in Cully. But for folks who know Cully, it's Cully Boulevard between Prescott and Killingsworth, which used to be a very, very unsafe street. And so we were doing a lot of work trying to make it so that the contracting was diverse, that minority-owned and women-owned businesses were able to compete for the contracting, and local workers got to do the work. That was very, very difficult. But at the end of it, the community folks came up to us and they said, that was really cool. We like actually going and talking to our Transportation Bureau and the state folks, and this was really great. But you know what? We're the lowest income people in the room, and we're the only one around the table in these meetings who's not getting paid. All right, Alan, you're getting paid. The government folks are getting paid. The other nonprofits are getting paid. We're not getting paid. Why don't you pay us to come to meetings? Which turns out, surprise, to be legally very difficult. In terms of employment law and tax law, and so the amount of time we had to spend with lawyers to figure that out it took a long time, but we were able to lift up a program where we paid them basically for civic advocacy, and we were able to repeat that in other areas, pay folks to participate in the environmental analysis of Cully Park. So I think that it was just them telling us what they wanted and us recognizing that we had the ability to go to the lawyers and figure out, okay, so how do we actually do this? And I would say that that helped us just continue to refine our approach of how do we take whatever access and resources we have and use it to create a pathway that drives dollars all the way into pockets of low-income people and people of color and the businesses that they own or that they work for.
Thank you.
So I appreciate the last statement, Alan, about how do we create a pathway that drives cash into the pockets of people. And frankly, that's my goal as well, working in local county government. We at the Multnomah Idea Lab tried to bring human-centered design into county government, which centers people. This concept of critical thinking, so listening well to others, looking at the research, trying to lift that up, talking about it with everyone, so we start to build some different what do we know, and then working to test these ideas out in the community in the real world. So we are very interested in moving to a package from the county's perspective that isn't simply service delivery, right? So if your vision of who's living in poverty is that they're somehow broken and they're needy, then you want to provide services to help fix them. Services are not going to get somebody out of poverty, right? If you then say, wait a minute, they're poor, they need cash, they need income, they need a job, let's get them a job. It's critically important that there be work opportunities for many reasons, but work, particularly in this community, if you're a person of color, is not going to get you out of poverty. It might get you to a place of stability where you can heat and eat and sleep concurrently most months, right? But it is not going to get you totally stable, right? The top 10 jobs that are available for folks in Multnomah County right now, only one of them pays enough to heat and eat and sleep, and that's registered nurse. Most of the families that we work with don't have the ability, even if they wanted to go back for a 4-year nursing degree. So then we started looking at a number of really important research that's coming out now that talks about the power of assets and access to assets, cash, for families that are living on a low income. So we are very much trying to look at how do we pull that package together, and frankly, the county has not previously been in the business of figuring out how to get assets, cash, the pathway for cash, to get into the pockets of people. So we're running 2 tests right now that look at unconditional cash transfer, right? So there are conditional cash transfers, like the temporary assistance for needy families, where if you do certain behaviors, I will give you certain amounts of money. Or, savings accounts where you say, if you save in a certain way for a certain thing, we will match that. Conditional cash transfers are really effective in getting the behaviors that you want to condition, but they still are a way where the system's saying, I know better than you what you need to be doing for that money. So the county has been testing for the last 2 years an unconditional cash transfer project that works with families who are eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit and basically gives them cash to spend in whatever way, right? So we would trust that the family knew what they needed to do and would spend that money in pursuit of whatever they needed to pursue. And what we found is that it makes an incredible difference with the income volatility, John, that you were talking about, with the unknown. And when that happens, and it's quite a moderate amount, it's less than, it's quite a moderate amount. We gave $1,000 cash transfers. Some of the research looks at 2 to 3. But when that happens, particularly when children are young, it has an amazing effect for that child throughout their academic career in terms of their academic success, their future earnings, their ability to be more stable financially. And when you talk about assets, financial assets are really largely generationally given, right? So if your parents had the asset, then you were likely going to get the benefit of that asset. If your parents didn't, you are going to struggle to have that asset. Another test that we're doing that we feel quite strongly about is looking at a program that forms families, supports families to form into circles of support. So we don't form the circles of support, the families form the circles of support. There's no case management, there's no service delivery. Families set their own goals, and then we give them access to cash. So they get no or low interest loans. They're able to get into match savings accounts. They're able to ask for grants to support whatever it is they're interested in working on. These kinds of projects are happening in our community right now, and the point is twofold. One is to promote this idea that we could listen to people living on a low income, we could believe what we're told, and then we could take action as a government to respond and prove the concept so that then we can start to impact systems like temporary assistance to needy families and other places where it's not really help. It keeps people, it keeps families in a down position, and that's where we are visioning into this systems change piece. We are very interested in the universal basic income, and for us, we're interested in that with a plus, which is an additional amount to that basic income that basically addresses the racial wealth gap in the community in which you're going to do the universal basic income. And I don't know if folks are familiar with this, but there's a lot of people talking now, particularly in the tech industry, that we've hit peak jobs as a county, right, as a country. So sort of with peak oil, there's still oil, but there's no more oil being produced, right? There are still jobs, and there's still jobs growing, but the family wage jobs that however that mythology is of like you could graduate from high school, get into a family wage job and work super hard and buy a house, and then you start to live those assets to your children, is really mythology anymore, I think, and we haven't come to grips with that. So if we're in peak jobs, how is it people are going to live? How are they going to get their basic needs met? And so there's a lot of discussion now about this universal basic income concept, which basically says, what if people had their basic needs met? What else would they do? What else would be unleashed in our communities if people didn't have to worry about heating and eating and sleeping? And for us then to have that dimension of, I'm going to say reparations, but to openly and honestly address the racial wealth divide in the local community is an important aspect of that. So there's a couple of examples.
Yeah.
Just a few things. We're an idea lab. We have a lot of ideas.
And it's interesting, in all three of your comments, you talked one way or another about, I guess, the phrase human-centered design. But a question that's popping up as thinking about what you're saying is there's the sort of human behavior of folks with fewer assets and less wealth, which is where it sounds like you're directing your focus, and yet there's also the question of, for a lot of what you're talking about, the need to change the behavior at the end of folks with the assets. And so I just want to ask about that. Where does it make more sense to direct energy? Where are you more optimistic about change happening?
Well,
I think you have to, let's say the same thing. I think you have to direct it at community.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, good.
So you're optimistic, good. All right, yeah, Alan?
Yeah, well, I just think that, first of all, we're in a discussion the other day of a group of organizations that have come together to try to develop a more comprehensive response to the increased incidence of hate crime and hate speech and graffiti and vandalism and all the stuff that we saw leading up to the election and after, whether it's what happened right here in Alberta a couple weeks ago, or the graffiti on a church in Cully the week before that, or the man's house in Troutdale, or all that kind of thing. And we were kind of running down our list of, like, who are the targeted communities? And our communities are being targeted. Let's be very, very clear. Who are the targeted communities that we want to serve? And we got down that list, we realized there are so many of us. Like, why are we in this position? We actually have tremendous power within our communities because we have a tremendous number of people, and it's only through that investment that you can make any kind of real change or extract anything from where the resources are.
Yeah. I've been lucky where I work at Mercy Corps because we've got some smart people that advise us, and two of them were professors. One, Crystal Hall at University of Washington, who is she refers to herself as a marketing expert. which studies, or she teaches at the public policy school. The other one is Noel Nettesel at Reed College, and she's an economist. And if you imagine, are there any Reed undergrads here? Oh, thank God. That's actually why I bring this notebook, is because I've spoken so often to our classes, and they'll fact check absolutely everything you say on the spot. But those two women coached me about what's now referred to as behavioral economics. And it's, if you imagine having a dinner party with a marketing professor, an economist, and a psychologist, you think, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. But in fact, those three disciplines collided to create this pathway that induces better behavior and better economic decision making. And in a sense, we designed the Community Investment Trust with the feedback from people, but it really uses basically psychology and marketing to help people make better financial choices.
But that's right where, though, that's where I wanted to push a little bit, is on the which people are being encouraged and incentivized to make better financial choices. That's in a way my question. Is it the people who have fewer financial resources, or is it the people with more financial resources? That's part of what I'm asking. Where should the focus be if we know we have limited resources?
Well, I think everybody probably needs better financial decision making. So in the case with our Community Investment Trust, we decided not to say, okay, this is going to be for poor people alone. We aspire to make it accessible to everybody and to drive the price point down so that it's going to be more meaningful for people at lower income. But it's clearly better to say this 29,000 square foot office space is everybody's. It's the teachers at David Douglas High School. It's the nurse that works down at Adventist Healthcare. It's the U.S. Senator that lives 4 blocks away. It's everybody's. But to put it into 6 languages and have people that are training, we have a course that's mandatory to be an investor that's being led and stipended. The teachers are stipended, and they're from the neighborhood. So it isn't us coming in. It's not an expert in finance or anybody coming in to teach a course. It's empowered by the people that are there to train the investors. It'll be 400 or 500 investors by the time we get it fully subscribed. Does that answer the question? I'm sorry.
It's definitely in the direction, yeah.
So for me, I think the solutions have to be sought from the community, from the people who are impacted. Now, I would argue all of us are impacted in one way or another from the racial inequity in this community and all of those dimensions. However, you have to center the focus on where the disparity and discrimination is greatest. Professor John Powell, who's been here many times, is from California, talks about targeted universalism. Right? So that's the concept of what is the common good? What is, and again, you got to be careful about whose universe you're talking about. However, what's, something that would help everyone, and then you work where the disparities are greatest first. And in this situation, that is communities and people and families of color. So that's where I think we focus and center our problem solving and our curiosity and our best listening and our belief when somebody tells us something. Now, I'm going to circle back to what I said at the beginning, which is I work for government. Government policies caused, government policies can change. I think where the resources have to be gotten from is at the other end of the spectrum, right? So you flirted with the mortgage interest tax deduction, but let's go there, right? Let's go there. So, some crazy number of $100 billion is what is spent on the mortgage interest tax deduction. And really what that is a wealth transfer to the wealthiest people in our country, right? So renters are excluded from that. People who happen to own their homes but own smaller homes with smaller mortgages get less. And those who can't afford to own their homes don't get anything at all, right? Even modest changes in the tax laws and the policies that create and support the mortgage interest tax deduction would have incredible impact into communities of color, and certainly you could start to build those kind of benefits for renters, right? It doesn't have to be used exclusively for the mortgage of your single family home that you have. There's incredible resistance from, average people because they see it as their benefit or a tax savings. We have to think about it what it is. It's a public investment. It's welfare for the wealthiest in our country who are able to own homes. Right? Now, let's be clear. I own a home, and I appreciate that, when I do my taxes, I have an interest deduction. However, I don't need to have all of that interest deduction, right? Could we even all accept half and use the other half of $1 billion? I feel like a little $1 billion to create greater equity in our communities, right? Those are the things that I think we have to look for in terms of the resources. I'll give one other thing because, I'm on a roll and you guys interrupt in here. So, urban renewal districts and areas, right? Like, could we not spend an hour talking about the downfalls of the urban renewal districts? Largely, hours. Hours, right? Largely policy, government policy, public policy that benefits large-scale developers. It does not benefit the average homeowner. We create these monolithic, sliced down to the middle of the street and block areas for these urban renewal districts, and then we give incredible financial incentives that never trickle down to anyone living on even a modest income, let alone a low income. What if we start, so one of the things that I have found out is that there's a cap on the geographic area that you can have in an urban renewal area in a community, and in Portland it's 15%. I don't know if it's the state, I'm ignorant about a lot of this. However, we're not at our 15% of the land here. We're probably at around 12 or 13, right? So that's sort of marginal dust, right? 2 or 3%. What if we created, I call it a virtual URA, and my colleagues in the mill loathe that. So let me just say, what if we created a scattered site URA that combined individual homeowners, and by the way, perhaps they're individual homeowners of color, into a scattered site, URA, where those tax benefits and those financial benefits and the advantages that are given to developers in a monolithic URA actually then are available to individual homeowners or individual, more local developers who aren't developing huge, 15 condo, et cetera, right? Would that not be a way to redistribute the wealth that we are already distributing into the hands of people who need it most? Those are the kinds of things that I think we have to challenge our structures and our folks like Prosper Portland and City of Portland and Multnomah County to think differently about who's in poverty, why they're in poverty, and what the role of government is to redress and remake the inequity we created, right?
So, but in a way, both the examples of the mortgage interest deduction and the scattered site URA or the virtual URA, whichever term is, both of those seem to raise again the question of where are we most looking to push behavior change? And I guess just to put a finer point on the example, I don't know how many people saw the Sunday magazine and the New York Times this past Sunday, but there were two articles, two kind of big feature articles. One was about the mortgage interest deduction, and one was about non-monogamous marriages.
I saw that one.
You saw that one. Well, that was
now
the
it's getting
cover.
good, folks. Now
That
it's
was the
getting good.
cover article, and I suspect that's the one. Maybe I'm revealing too much about myself. I don't know, but I think that's what most people ended up reading first. And so it's a question of how do you get people to care about the mortgage interest deduction? How do you get people to care about a scattered site? I lost URA.
Urban renewal area.
Urban renewal area. So in a way, I just want to push that question about behavior change at all levels, as you're talking about, and to go back to maybe the last two words in the film, which again were for everyone. How for everyone do we go ahead and try to push this kind of behavior change? Sorry, Alan.
Well, I was just, a lot of our time over the last few days has been spent thinking about, we were talking a little bit about this, Mary Lee, about a new So this is government coming to the market trying to incent change, right? Which it can do. There's many examples of it doing that, and sometimes we do choose that as a vehicle to affect our values, right? That's fine. So right now, both the county and the city are sort of drafting these sort of dual or parallel resolutions around 100% renewable energy, right? That we want to have 100% renewable energy in the city and the county by, I think, like 2050 or something like that, which on the surface seems like a great thing, right? We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change is the challenge of our times and tremendously impactful on frontline communities, on low-income and people of color communities. But one of the things that we've been pushing for and our partners have been pushing for is, well, we want to see this kind of infrastructure developed at a certain accessible scale, right? We're not interested, not to go too far back in the past, but we're not interested in one big Oregon Sustainability Center, right? We're interested in 70 June Key Delta centers, right? A bunch of community-based, right? A bunch of community-based infrastructure led, designed by community organizations. I think that if the behavior change that we need to affect in the policy framework is to align the mainstream environmental organizations into that vision of, can we set a hard standard that we're going to create 50% of all of our energy from this kind of community-based infrastructure that meets people's needs, educates youth, creates jobs, improves livability in a neighborhood, improves resilience. All right, why can't we, right? We're making all kinds of other goals in this kind of resolution. So the first group we've got to convince is, it's kind of like the dichotomy between, like, do you work within community or outside of community? We need to reach out to our mainstream environmental allies who've been working on renewables for generations and saying, look, this is really how we're going to be successful in not just in achieving our environmental goals, but in making sure that they're buying of and led by low-income people and people of color.
So I want to move us towards questions and ask one last question while just signaling that in about 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to invite audience questions over here. And I just want to ask, I guess thinking about, as a last question that I get to ask, and it's thinking about, John, and your story. You went back. Was that 94 that you were talking about? When was it? What year was it that?
The bank robber was in 86.
86.
The year of the bank robber.
The year of the bank robbery. So I think I want to ask about, the framing, I guess, narrative for tonight was around creative solutions to poverty and inequality. And I guess I want to ask if it feels like, are we getting closer to understand, looking forward 10 years? Does it feel like we're getting closer to solutions to this? What are the signs that we are, or what are the big challenges to getting there as you see them?
He was asking you, so we're just waiting for you. We don't want to jump on your mind.
Okay, so in my perfect world kind of question, no. I think number one is giving people an option and a choice and access. Financial inclusion is an important step at a scale, and that's only part of it. The mortgage interest deduction is embedded in our sense of what we all deserve because we get it, but it probably needs to be stair-stepped at a state level with second homes at a certain level so you can just get started. Changing realtors, a lot of them are my friends, but changing their behavior is not going to, we'll be waiting forever for that. Right. But the estimate that was, again, in that same article everybody read this weekend, evidently, I hope you read it because it was great in the New York Times Magazine. But if you took away the mortgage interest deduction, it would reduce housing prices by, this is an old study, I guess, that's often still cited, between 13% and 17%. It's probably more now. So it would start to address affordability as well. So I think financial inclusion and changing those tax policies are two practical and doable steps.
Well, I think that what that just means is that the world is full of money. I mean, it's not a question of, is there enough money? It's how do you access and deploy it for different people? And I would say that we were talking a little bit about this as well, that it's, I really appreciate what you were saying, Riley, that in this time that our communities are completely under attack, right? The communities that we work with are under attack, right? Officially, like from the most powerful institution that's ever existed in the history of the world, the United States federal government is attacking our communities right now. But in that time, as we seek to protect our communities to make resilient communities, right? Because to be resilient in the face of, people use that in terms of climate change a lot, but to be resilient in the face of a natural disaster is not too different than the kind of organizing and resilience you need in the face of the dramatic rent increase, or from the ICE enforcement action in your neighborhood, or from hate crime. But even while we're doing those things, we need to be very aggressive about pursuing a pro-immigrant, pro-people of color agenda in our work. This is the time we have to take as much as we can and open the door all the way to directing these resources to our targeted communities.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting time, and the conversations that I have been in around this time have been very different, I think, than many of the conversations I've heard from, well-intentioned and well-meaning white folks. From our perspective, this is the way it's always been. We're here. This has always been the experience for people of color. Right? And the fact that now it's visible, and that the mainstream white communities are like getting hip to the fact that all this stuff has always been the case, has always been the reality, and for many, many decades, people of color were not believed when we would say, this is how it is, this is our experience. In many ways, it's a relief from my perspective, although it's been hard to sort of hear the angst from, even my closest friends around this, that it's up front and it's visible now. And, I think the challenge for me is if people are woke now, then do something about it, right? Like, come to the party, get on the train, because this has merely been how it has always been. It is how things are. Now that some of us have been, educated around it, what are you going to do with it? I think in many ways, from the feminist movement, we thought if only we could get men to understand what it was like to be a woman in this society and to experience sexism and misogyny and the violence that happens against women, it would end because men would give up their privilege and would dismantle sexism and the structures that, create it. Well, I'm still waiting. Same for white folks and people of color. I mean, when you look at any system of oppression, the ecosystems of oppression, Alan, that you were talking about, simple awareness and understanding of someone's experience is important, but if that's not coupled with the will...
The interruption.
Right? The will to take action and to actually dismantle the systems under which you receive privilege, it's kind of empty. I am, in this moment, incredibly hopeful because I think people are waking up and they are figuring out that action has to be taken. And I'm going to circle right back to the film. That was a call to action for all of us. I take it as a call for action. And there is much, much work to be done. I think doing it is much more important than thinking about it and talking about it.
So as we shift, we're going to shift over to questions over here, and I guess I would encourage you to let us know who you are and ask a fairly brief question so we can get these folks in. And as we shift to questions, maybe we could just say another preliminary thanks to Alan, John, and Mary.
Hi, my name is Tony Salvador. The patterns that I've heard tonight suggest that the small instances of justice gained were gained by extraordinary acts of twisting and thwarting the existing government institutions to gain those measures. if I stipulate, and if we all stipulate, that governments were set up by those with resources and power from our founding fathers on, should we not be considering a redesign of our government to address the questions that we're addressing tonight? Or do we really imagine that the government can continue with these incremental, tiny little changes, and that this will be the conversation we have 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 20 years from now?
Yeah, right on. I don't think there was a question there.
Are you asking, do we have an alternative vision for how government might function, or? You know, it's like someone once said about I believe it was an activist talking about the difference between the Democratic and Republican Party, and the guy was like, well, I don't have any illusions about their responsibility to power, but there's only one of them that I even get to negotiate with, right? And so I feel like it's that way with government. It's very difficult to negotiate or build power to be able to negotiate with some of these larger structures that have influence on government. It's hard to organize against this corporate entity or that corporate entity because they don't need your vote, right? But you can organize and against government in a way that you can't otherwise. So I don't have a really good answer other than that that's the only ones we can negotiate with.
We are seeing one sort of alternative vision of how government operates in practice right now. Maybe not what Tony was suggesting. I don't know.
Let's say the all women, majority women of color in the first time in the history of this community at the Multnomah County Commission, right? That's both symbolic and meaningful.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Malika Valentine Balhaj, and I'm actually going to take this opportunity to not ask a question, but I want to honor my students and my relatives, my brothers who are here today, whose voices were in the film that we watched, and I want to honor Sika and Donovan for all of the work that they did in coming out and listening to and believing the stories of our young people and our relatives. And so I just want to take a moment to just like honor them and respect them.
Thank you.
And the last thing that I want to say, just like that appreciation is really deep from my heart, and I think a lot of times this work is very spiritual and sacred and ceremonial. And I encourage, if y'all want to hear from the community, we are having an open house at Portland Youth Builders tomorrow. So if you really want to hear from us and from our young people what we're about out in Lentz and East County, 8:30 in the morning, PYB 92nd and Holgate, right across from Lentz Park. We're going to be there. We're going to be sharing. So I encourage you to come and to listen and to believe the continuation of the stories that we heard today. So if we could just get one more round of applause for Sika, Donovan, and the youth. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right on.
So my name is Danny, and I also work at Portland Youth Builders. And I'm really excited and proud to represent Portland Youth Builders. I'm really happy for my students who were able to share just a tiny piece of their story, because they are a much bigger piece to East County than the city would like to accept. I first would like to say I'm a little concerned that the immediate answer when asked, where does change come? All three of you guys, which I think you guys did a wonderful job, it was community. And not that I disagree with that, but many of the issues that are in our community had nothing to do with the community itself. It was the bureaucracy that put them there. So this is a tag team. This is not the community is going to change things. It needs to come from multiple aspects. And being in that community and working in that community, I know we're doing our part. And I'm afraid the other side is not. And so continuing to say it is on the community to change things, that frustrates me. The question I have is for the room that I'm in. I'm confident that many people in this room are not necessarily doing their part to help East County. Showing up in this setting and spending an hour of your time is not going to make a change. My question to you is, what are you going to do when you leave here? I know what I do tomorrow. What are you guys going to do tomorrow and going forward to help the problem? Because this is not just an East County problem. This is a Portland problem. This is an Oregon problem. This is a country problem, and obviously much bigger than that. But it's, for me, it starts in East County, specifically Southeast Portland and Portland Youth Builders. And I hope to see as many as you tomorrow morning and going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Inge Fisher-Williams, and I belong to the Northeast 350 chapter and the Beyond Coal Task Force of the Sierra Club. And I can tell you that we've struggled long and hard to figure out how to implement the wish to have communities of color and low income and renters benefit from the community solar provision that ended up in the law that was passed last year. Now, my question is, how can we tap your expertise to have a dialogue with the Public Utility Commission, who is presently drafting the ground rules for community solar? Who's eligible, who can participate, who benefits? I bet you the utilities are there every day. But we need to find a way to get your real estate investment trust concept built into eligible to apply for community solar, to tap the small investments so that even renters can have the benefit of the lower utility bills. So how can we tap your expertise?
Yeah, with respect to physical property and community solar, I think that's a really solid path for asset building. And we're looking into it on the building right now because our utility bills are way too high. And if we can drive the cost down, it's just going to improve the yield for every investor and the value of the building. So yes, bring it on, please.
I'm Kendall Staples. I was actually featured in the film. So I hear a lot about, and I actually have like 2 or 3 questions kind of inside of this, but I kind of constantly hear this whole thing of color this, color that, that type of thing. Honestly, that's kind of tiring for me because I know that people can look at me, and honestly, I've been in the struggle. Like, I was like homeless for 5 years, all through high school, still finished high school, so nobody can tell me nothing about that. But I do want to know that if you take color off of the issues that we have, does that make your job any harder or any easier to make a solution, to come up with any type of solution whatsoever? Because honestly, all of us have a color, but we all share a struggle. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way to say that no one has a struggle here. Unfortunately, money makes the world go around, yeah, whatever. But I don't feel like color should have to be the topic of conversation to have a solution. On top of that, I also want to know, okay, we're talking about the numbers, right? But we have a whole city full of different areas that people live in. Even the nicest areas have the bigger problems than just out in the numbers. So is it going to start with the numbers and go into the other areas, or are we going to focus on all areas at one time instead of just looking at the numbers because it's sketchy, because rent is super high out there, or, people of color are being forced out there, so now it's a problem? There's been a problem before people of color went out there in the first place. Mm-hmm. Gentrification has been a problem before money was an issue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Money wasn't an issue back in 19 so-and-so. The color was the issue. But if you take color out of the issue, is there still going to be a solution, is what I want to know.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
For me, so thank you for those comments. I appreciate that. And for me, you can't take color and race out of the conversation of solution, because the experience and the reality is so racialized and different for people of color and non-people of color. So factually, you can't talk about this without understanding those real disparities, and it has to be front and center in the solution. And I come back to this concept of targeted universalism. I absolutely agree with you. There has to be a common good and an understanding of we're all interrelated with each other, and within that, there are people who are suffering disparities greater than other folks, and that is on a race line. And so for me, you can't talk about one without the other, but it has to be based, and I really appreciate your comments on this, in the concept of universalism and a common good and a public good.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carolyn, and I think I've spoken several times on the issue of gentrification. I've been gentrified all over Portland, and I wanted to say, talk about a little bit about, we all know the historicity of Oregon, the history of Portland, you know, the history and generations, from generation to generation, what happens, you know, and the race issues in Portland, from the supremacist groups and, you know, laws that have been in place where, you know, black people can't own property, and they didn't want black people, people of color owning property. We already know that, and we've talked about that over and over and over. But I want to talk to you, ask you a question. My question is directed to the lady. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Mary. Yeah.
Mary, you know, I want to direct my question to you about the systems that are in place that keep people in poverty, the systems that are in place that say, well, you're low income, you're better, you get these benefits, you're better off on your benefits, you're better off keeping benefits than being self-sufficient. Okay, you're better off on welfare than being, you know, having your own. Yes. These things are a problem that we don't talk about. We don't talk about when people die and leave their property, don't have estate planning, and we don't talk about that stuff. And we need to expand the conversation. So my question to you is, when you've already stated, you know that people in social services don't believe the people that are in poverty that come to you and say, well, I want to do this, but how can I do it? How can we address the policies and procedures that are conflicting, that
Yes.
makes it seem better to stay poor than to rise out of the policy? If you don't do this, if you do this, if you make this amount of money, then you'll lose your health benefits. You know, we have these things in place, and it scares people. Yeah. So it's a little bit more, I think it's a little bit more complicated than what we're talking about here. So what do you think is the solution for that?
Great. Thank you.
So I want to say I don't feel like I've got answers. But what I and my colleagues in the Idea Lab and at the Multnomah County are trying to do is to prove that it's possible and prove that the systems and the practices don't work, and do that in real time with real people in the community. So can we put our money where our mouths are, that we can listen to people living on a low income, we can believe them, and then we can make resources available. I believe if we can show that it's possible and prove that it's possible, then that gives us another way to fight. I mean, there are many pathways to fight on this. It's another way to fight against what is currently in place because it's based on faulty information.
John or Alan, did either of you? So we'll go, it looks like 2 more questions, and then we're going to invite you to talk to each other to continue this with the lighting system different. So 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Molly. There are definitely people who are benefiting from this system, as horrible as it is. My question is, do you think that there's any way to measure who is benefiting from this system and create sort of incentives to capture the externality that is the economic lack of benefit that's not being paid for, and then make those people pay for the solutions?
Thanks.
That's a you question. Isn't that's a tax question?
It is. Well, we mentioned the mortgage interest tax deduction, so that's one, a big one. I'll just throw this out because I think it's interesting, just in the evolution of this neighborhood relative to 122nd, is that the disproportionate tax rates now paid in this neighborhood because of property tax measures starting in 1990, 92, redressed in 95 or 6, right? So measure 5, 50, 47, the cap tax rates, assessed rates, and increased only 3%. So in this neighborhood, what it looked like 20 years ago, and mid-90s, 20 years, or mid-90s, so 20 years ago, was so different than it is now. My colleague Sven Gatchev back there and I did a little research and looked at 10 homes just north of here, across the street, and what the market value of those homes is relative to their tax payments, and what 10 similar homes in around 122nd. So just looking at a parallel. And here's an interesting evolution of consequences, is that the 10 houses across the street, so just literally the next block over, we picked 10 randomly that had roughly the same square footage. The real market value of those 10 houses is $5.7 million, and their property tax aggregation is just shy of $27,000. The same 10 homes whose market value was different and was capped differently 20 years ago, out around 122nd, the market value of those homes is $2.2 million, again, compared to 5.7. And the property tax rate they pay on that real market value, of course they're not paying it on real market value, is $32,000. So East Portland is paying a far disproportionate share of their taxes relative to market value than these neighborhoods that have gentrified. Who's to blame for that? I guess Bill Sizemore is the one to blame for that. But
Let's blame.
and it's going to take a constitutional amendment to change it. So, how do we redress that? I think we can, but it'd take enormous political will, and it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, Alan, yeah.
Well, and I would just say that you'll sometimes you hear like an elected official say something like, well, I don't think that government should be in the business of picking winners and losers, right? That's a caveat. They're like, well, I don't know if we can do what you want us to do because we don't. But the fact is that our government decisions pick winners and losers all the time. There's statistics that you gave, and so we can make a decision about capturing some of that value from the winners almost anytime we want to. We can do it on a property level, a block level, a neighborhood level. We can say, you want to come into this neighborhood, this diverse neighborhood that still is affordable, that has a range of cultures and incomes living in it. Well, we have some very specific expectations about how you're going to develop here and how inclusive and community-based you're going to be. And if you don't want to do that, either you can't build here. If you want to do that, come on, and we're going to take some of that resource and we're going to put it right back into the community. So we can pick these winners and losers all the time.
Thank you.
My name is Brito. I'm here speaking on behalf of my ancestors from the last 400 years that's been trapped on this continent we call North America. I work for Southeast Works and Rosewood Initiative, by the way. All of this is beautiful. You guys are awesome. Thank y'all for coming out. But I can't sit here and listen to the seed not being watered, which is, I don't know if you guys ever read a book called The Willie Lynch Letter, but I encourage you to go read that book. And it was a slave owner who talked about how to make a slave. And basically, what he would do is instill fear inside of the pregnant mother who was giving birth to her child. And the slave owner would tie a horse to the strongest male slave on this side and a horse to the other side and kill the strongest slave, which would instill fear inside of the mother as well as the baby, and also put fear in the other males, all right? So when you're talking about, poverty and color, that's my client Kendrick who was in the film. Me and Sika and Donovan, we all worked on this film together, by the way. And I just sit here and I'm just listening to you guys like, you're missing the whole point. The whole thing is that this country is built on racism. It's built on the blood of my ancestors and those who came here over 400, 500 years ago. And that's why we're sitting here talking. It's because you're trying to find a change to this, but it's not gonna change, ma'am. You work for the government, which is one of the biggest devils that in the world is the American government.
Yep.
So with that being said, it's like we're doomed. We can sit here and talk and do all of this we want, but until we change, we had one black president, okay? One out of how long we've been here? And you want us to be happy with that. Oh, we had a black president, good. Whoa. We've been here 400 years. So when I sit here and I listen to you guys, I applaud y'all liberalism and all of that. I grew up in Watts, California. Okay, I relocated in Portland in the 90s when there was still a so-called black community. And I just watched people get displaced slowly and slowly and slowly. And I work out there, so I see it firsthand. And these people are out there lost. They're lost. They don't have an idea of what community is no more. And when I come to here, I went to church here in the 90s. Now they selling liquor here. This is part of the problem. There is no respect for what we did here and what we've been in this community. And you guys have to wake up and understand that, okay, it's deeper than what we can sit here and talk about all day. We have to, first of all, put it out there like, okay, we know this country has systemic racism and issues. Without addressing that first, you can't talk about poverty and jobs and all of that because they don't want us to work. They want to keep us in the Jim Crow era. They want to keep the black codes on us. Okay, as slaves, we were never set free. Okay, they signed the Civil Rights Act because they wanted to get us to vote Democratic. We were all Republican first. And then Theodore said, we got the New Deal. Let's get these projects going up. Let's get all these blacks to vote for us. That's what we're dealing with now. And we'll always continue to do this, no matter how much we sit here and talk, until you address the actual problem that, damn, I come from a lineage of racists, even though I'm not a racist. My great-great-grandfathers owned slaves, and I'm benefited from that.
Yeah.
How can I help? I'm not a racist, though, and I applaud y'all white people that's not racist, but guess what? You benefit from your forefathers' earnings.
That's right.
And we are carrying the blood and the sweat of our ancestors on us. And we will always be a step under. And don't let us go to jail and get a felony. Oh, now it's even worse. Now we're going to continue to be oppressed for the rest of our lives with just trying to make a way to make some money to put food on the table. What you call it? Heat, eat, and sleep. I love that phrase. Because that's all we're trying to get as a people, and we're trying to get out of that into we got to get economically powered. So let's talk about, bringing some real books in schools and some black teachers and some black, people we can look up to for our kids. Let's get some black characters in these books. Let's get some, there's other sides of our culture than gangbanging, music, and entertainment. There's more than that to us, all right? So once you guys address that as a people, wherever y'all going after this, y'all going home to, watch whatever movies or, your little drinks and cocktails, think about that part right there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And maybe just as a way of transitioning to concluding this part, we could encourage people not to go on to whatever's next too quickly, but instead we are going to encourage you to stay here for a bit and talk to someone you don't know. So I'm explicitly making a request that you find someone in here you don't know and that you take at least a few minutes talking about the following question. Where and how have differences of wealth shown up between you and other people? So it's a pretty straightforward question, but it opens out in lots of different directions. And I know it's just conversation and not action, but this is the way our organization shows up, is to try to get people talking to each other and hearing each other. And we'd love for you to talk to someone you don't know, again, about where and how differences of wealth have shown up between you and other people. So we're going to put the lights up in a minute. Before we do, I want to thank everybody that stepped up to the microphone and voiced a thought or asked a question. I want to remind people about tomorrow morning at 8:30, and so I hope that address will be that the teacher out in the numbers who's talking about Youth Builders event tomorrow at 8:30 is available to let people know and other folks who know. And I want to again thank Donovan and Sika and everybody that spoke to them for that film, so thank you very much. And lastly, I want to thank the three of you for being game to come in here and talk about the work you're doing in the world. Thanks very much. So I hope you guys keep talking with each other. Thanks for coming tonight.